Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Kirby. I'm the chair of the Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. We're very delighted to have with us today Rabbi Joshua Kullock from West End Synagogue, who's joining us from vacation, actually, to talk with us today a little bit about election stress and what Judaism can tell us about living in such troubled times. So welcome, Rabbi Kullock. Thank you again for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of Jewish texts you turn to in troubling times?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I I tend to go back to a couple of texts. Not that long ago, actually, after the first debate that we saw, I was thinking about the fact that our tradition was built through debate, through rabbis arguing with one another. But most of the time, it was done in a polite way. And the truth of the matter is that there is a Talmudic text that says that the reason we usually tend to go according to the school of Hillel and not according to the school of Shammai is because the school of Hillel was both willing to listen to what was said on the other side of the aisle, was willing to change when what was said on the other side of the aisle was reasonable enough. And so what gave them the upper hand was a matter of character. So for me, those texts and those insights are interesting. And they are interesting because I read those texts with the other Talmudic traditions saying that even if they were fighting or discussing or debating all along, they still married their sons with their daughters and vice versa, which reminds us, and I think it's part of the big challenge that we are facing as a nation, that we are entitled to have different opinions on what is the best solutions for this country, but we should all remember that we are all part of the same country, and we shouldn't be kind of losing. I think that one of the things that I'm most fearful about is the fact that people tend to forget, and so you see such a growing rift between those on this side and those on that side, and that's particularly troubling.
Right. One of the things that we struggle with sometimes at CRC is how to decide when we're going to act on something and when not. How do you do that personally with regard to the synagogue?
Well, I tend to think that consulting with your pillow is a wonderful advice. Not jumping. Again, the whole system is thought for all of us to jump right at the chance, because again, what I see as a trend, and I have spoken about this in my congregation, so people who are from West End will already know about this. I think that it's bad business for the Jewish community at large to be kind of polarized between the extreme right and the extreme left, and to be played by those on the extremes. And so again, every time something comes up, I try not to be taken by those, pulling on both ends, but to try to see what needs to be done, how can be this addressed, and again, I try not to allow myself to be kind of caught by indignation. Indignation is a powerful force, but sometimes it takes you to places that won't fix anything. And in my opinion, there is like the dark side of speaking up at every time, because speaking up can become like the moral pacifier. So you speak up, you say things, you feel great with yourself, but the world remains exactly as it was. So that is like a moral pacifier,
Mhm.
which is not necessarily addressing or fixing anything. I'm not saying that we need to remain silent every time. I just think that we need to be smart and understand when and why do we need to say what we need to say. Again, it's a, that's the ongoing tension. So I think about these things. I post when I think I need to post something. I publish at the Tennessean when I think that I need to say something. But again, it's like I'm not a huge fan of the rhetorical back and forth that usually fits the troll on both ends, which again, to me, it's a bad mistake. But
Right.
it's only me.
So to follow up on that, how do you decide what issues to speak about, public policy issues in sermons?
Well, again, it's I usually speak about policy issues or about things that trouble me, for personal reasons or because I feel the pain of those who are marginalized and continue to be marginalized. Uh, I speak about issues that pertain to the risks of not being capable of criticizing those on the same side that you are. It's like I keep telling to my Democrats here that it's very easy to come against the Republicans, but you need to be you need to be as consistent in your criticism to the Republican Party, also to your elected officials that represent you. It's like there's not a whole lot of science in criticizing those on the other side, and we need to be like the checks and balances on for those on whatever you are. And the same applies to the Republicans. The Republicans criticizing Democrats, that's the easy thing. But I would actually feel way more comfortable with Democrats being capable of having a critical view of their Democratic elected officials, and Republicans having a critical and harsh view with policies or attitudes that should be called and called to attention. So I speak about these things. I try to, again, I don't think that I need to make it personal, but by understanding how these things are happening, not that long ago, like a year and a half ago, we brought to town Rabbi Shai Held, who is a very smart rabbi from New York at the Hadar Institute, and he was asked whether Judaism supported capitalism or communism, and he said that the answer is neither one of them, and that Judaism's role is to be a critical voice to whatever system is in place. And I like that very much. I am very much against Judaism being dressed in colors. Okay? That doesn't mean that we don't have a leaning or we don't vote this way or the other. But I do believe that part of our job, congregationally speaking, Jewishly speaking, and this is how I see my role as well, is to always inspire people to be a critical thinking voice, trying to understand what's at stake, and that way guiding the conversation towards the outcome of getting this country to a better place than where it is right now. And part of that, with this I close, is this idea that there was long time, a couple of years ago, there was a book, a biography of Abraham Lincoln called Team of Rivals. Beautiful, beautiful text, and speaks about the fact that Lincoln, when he became the president, put as part of his cabinet people who were not necessarily, yes men, people saying yes all the time, but his rivals. And I think that it's a wonderful reminder that this country and congregations and Jewish institutions should remain bipartisan in nature, because you want for the thoughtful Democrats and the thoughtful Republicans to come together and to think together, where the other side has some truth to their claims, and also how all of us can work on behalf of this country. Again, those on the extreme don't actually like any of that. But I try very hard, as much as I can, to insist on those values.
Right. So something that's been kind of controversial in the Jewish community locally and nationally lately is the issue of racial justice and to what extent we should be involved in racial justice movements, even if people on that side, some of them are anti-Semitic and expressing that publicly. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, you have to do both, meaning I think that our call as members of the Jewish people is to fight injustice wherever it is. And, Judaism is an ongoing call to make sure that we don't replicate what we already suffered when we were slaves in Egypt. So our ongoing journey into the promised land requires us to fight so that we can establish a society that makes room for everyone. Okay, and so in that case, the history of racism in this country needs to be addressed. Okay, to me, it's very clear that we cannot remain aside or indifferent to that. That doesn't mean that, as you well said, we have to ignore or pretend that there are no complicated spots in some of those calls. We saw it with the March of the Women, and we see it now with some parts of movements for racial equality. And I think that some smart writers, Barry Weiss, Stephen, what's his name at the New York Times?
Bret Stephens.
Bret Stephens,
yeah. Bret Stephens. Yeah, there you go. They are pointing to the fact, and I like them because of this, because they remind us of this idea that we need to be careful, because at the very end of the right, there is an anti-Semite waiting for us, and at the very end of the left, there is an anti-Semite waiting for us. Probably those at the extreme are like, cousins, distant cousins with one another. But again, so how can we work for a more just world without falling into the trap of those who have anti-Semitic leanings or are fond of religious leaders with a lot of anti-Semitic overtones, or that are very against the idea of a state of Israel? So those things need to be called, and we need to address those things. And that's why I continue to say, okay, we need to be critical, and you are, entitled to be leaning to the left, and that's very nice. Please don't blind yourself to the fact that there are some issues over there, and you can be leaning to the right, and please don't blind yourself to all the ugliness that we see on that end of the spectrum, on the cruelty and the racism, that the anti-Semitism, etc., because again, that's the big risk that we are facing right now. On the polarization, we don't win, for sure. I think that the country doesn't win either. So it's not only self-service and just thinking about ourselves, but I don't think that the polarization will take us anywhere that we should be willing to go.
You have kind of a unique perspective in our local community as an immigrant. Can you talk a little bit about how the current political divide in the US is similar or different from political debate and division in Argentina?
I think that actually you can see all across, this is a worldwide trend right now. It's like polarization. You see it in Israel, you see it in Argentina, you see it in the US. So it's not, it's only here. It's a way of doing politics. I don't like it. I understand. It's like when people are fired up, they tend to move. When life is boring, they tend not to move. So it's like that's how people like to play with fears, because we were hardwired evolutionarily to just respond when we feel threatened. And so much of what's going on can be understood as like a war of threats. Why? Because that's how people get to be moved. That's also one of the problems why it's so hard to achieve peace in the Middle East, for example. It's like, who cares about peace? Peace doesn't sell. So it's like we have this ongoing tension, I think. And again, I see it in Israel, I see it in Argentina, I see it here, and so many other places, Brazil, whatever, in which the whole structure seems, as I said, prone to, feed the fire. Because when there's no fire, people don't know what to do. It's like, I'm praying for boring politicians, but again, that's not very good for the media or for politics or for the attention industry that is all about getting our eyes just to see what's going on. That's boring. So it's part of the problem. But I think that it has become the way we do politics in many places. And the very dark side of all of this is that eventually people cannot talk to each other anymore, because they were pushed to kind of get more and more extreme in their views. And again, long term, that is not wonderful. It's not gonna bode well for anyone.
Right. Along those lines, can Jewish tradition help us, or their texts or things that can help us learn to listen better to each other?
Yes, I think that once again, it's like open. One of the things that I tell my Talmud student, I teach, or I learned with a couple of members of the congregation. Weekly we study Talmud, and a serious study of Talmud already trains you, puts your soul into the learning gym of understanding that people can have different opinions, and that's okay. We are losing some of that very basic understanding, because again, social media and the news and whatever are only about putting you into more extreme views, or just kind of refreshing what you already know. Because it's how to say it, we have that internal bias. We like to hear what we like to hear people telling us what we already believe. It's like it's confirmation bias. We love it. So that's what we are fed, and that's what Facebook and Twitter and whatever else, the algorithms are actually programmed for you to see people with your with your opinion. So you feel so great, and you tend to say, how on earth this guy on the other side of the aisle can believe what that guy is believing? It's completely nonsense. The problem is that that person is looking at the same Facebook, but the feed is completely different. So that guy is saying, how on earth that person is saying what she's saying. So going back to Talmud, to any, you open any Jewish basic classic text, and you see that it's a library. Jewish books in their original printed form have the text and the commentaries all around. So it's already a training into understanding that Shivim Panim La Torah, the Torah has 70 faces. So it doesn't have one face. It has 70. Life is complex. And I think that that's one of the many reasons investing in Jewish literacy is so important in our days. It's like we tend today in the Jewish world to go for the bumper stickers. We are proudly Jewish, but that pride is condensed in 2 words or 3 words or two ideas. Like very important. I do think that going back to a serious study of Jewish texts can train us for a world that is complex, for a world that won't be fixed with the only set of solutions that this party or that party has to offer us, and allows us to create what our texts like to call a selif haderei hadarim, make your heart of many rooms, which is learn how to live with the paradox of contradicting opinions, or the fact that people will be able to see life from a different perspective than your own. Okay, try to understand. I keep telling people who care to listen to me, it's like, again, against the confirmation bias, I think that there is a spiritual exercise that needs to be done in trying to understand what's the kernel of truth that someone thinking something different than myself it has to offer. Because we cannot say that those who vote different than we do are are blind, or I don't know, use whatever word that I can think about a lot of insults, but I don't want to use any of those because I'm polite. The point is, we cannot accept that those voting something different than we are just with a low IQ. It doesn't work. So the spiritual exercise, if half of the country is voting the other way, it doesn't matter who you vote for, there will be half of the country who is voting something else. 50-50, 48-52, whatever. My question is, what's there that speaks to them, and what's the kernel of truth that we may not be looking at? Okay, because for those things that we believe fondly, again, we already know them, and we are, reading newspapers or watching TV channels that will reinforce those things for us. So for that, we don't need much. We need to push ourselves to see we need to go back to what Hillel and his school used to do. Let's see what the Shammai boys have to tell us that is meaningful and important for the well-being and the betterment of this country. It might be that at the end of the day, we say not much, but we cannot desist from trying. And what I see is that people say, you are blue, so I'm not listening to you. You're red, you're completely nuts. Doesn't work. Like, it is not going to solve any problem.
I have one more question for you, and then I want to open it up to questions from the audience. We're a big enough group that I think it will be easiest if you type your questions into the chat, and then Deborah and I can kind of go through those, rather than everybody trying to unmic and or unmute and speak at once. So go ahead and start putting questions in the chat, those of you in the audience, if you have them. Rabbi, do you feel like the current political divide has impacted your congregation directly? And if so, how have you tried to manage that? Is it interfering in some way?
I would say that I don't think it is interfering big time, but we all walk a very fine line. Mm-hmm. I said this before, I will repeat it. It's like, I think that congregations need to remain bipartisan. This is important for people who are professionals at the congregation, for the lay leaders at the congregation. I don't know, maybe in Los Angeles, or maybe in, I don't know, Texas or specific parts of Texas, because now it's actually changing. It could be easy to be blue or red, but I think that congregations on the vast majority of the country should remain purple. And that is also a wonderful way to remind everyone that we need to work civilly and politely to create safe spaces in which we can agree to disagree. With that being said, I'm not necessarily making room for those with extremist views. And so those who are coming to bully the organization, myself, or other members of the congregation from this way or from that way, or from, whatever, pushing them to vote this way or that way, I don't think that congregation should do that. And I'm not very fond of those things happening in the walls of my sacred space. So as long as we can apply or appeal to the center, to the thoughtful Democrats and the thoughtful Republicans, because I do believe that out there are both. Again, those on the extreme, they would say, no, there's nothing like, it is an oxymoron. A Republican who is thoughtful doesn't exist. It's a mythical creature. On the other side, people would say the same. No. A Democrat who can actually think, that doesn't exist. I do think that they both exist. And I do believe that part of the healing that will happen, God willing, in this country will occur when we can create enough room, enough space for those that are closer to the center. And with them, pushing for solutions that actually understand the complexities facing this nation, instead of running wild with the sound bites that sound beautiful, okay? But they are just not going to bring us anywhere. So I think that because of I'm very open and I don't go around with any of these things, the congregation is still a place in which people can come, and I don't talk partisan politics most of the time around here, but I do know that there are members of my congregation that are on this side of the spectrum, and members of the congregation who are on that side of the spectrum, and members of the congregation who don't seem to have any connection with either of the parties as well, because of the extreme polarization. And again, I want to make room for everyone who's willing to think and address the complexities of this, of our reality, who is not willing to condone or celebrate, bullying of any kind, and who is, trying and understands that we are all together trying to work on behalf of a better country. That we lose where the ball is, and I think that we need to regain that.
All right. So a question came in. What does Judaism have to say about how to respond to a pandemic?
Hi, Judy. So I think that Judaism reminds us a couple of things. Number one is that, Baharta Bahaim, we need to look for, to save the lives. Usually in the US context, when you say that, it's pro-life, you go places that you are not going. I'm not going there, not with this question at least. When the Torah says, and you shall choose life, it's not speaking about abortion. It's speaking about creating a structure that preserves the life of those who are already born. The Talmud rabbis actually say that you cannot even live in a city in which there is no physician. If you are in a city with no physician, you need to just move somewhere else. There is an interesting conversation in modern halachic legal texts, for example, for vaccination. And Judaism is very clear that if you live in a place in which people don't vaccinate each other, you also need to leave. You need to go to a place in which the idea or the value is that we try to protect all of us. And so with all of that, it's very clear that Judaism will say that the health of the community, the health of the city, is way more important than the individual freedom of, I feel like wearing a mask, or I don't feel it like wearing a mask. In that regard, to me, again, Judaism has 70 faces. So everything that I'm saying, I'm signing, my name on it. But it's very clear on how I understand Judaism, that if the health of the group and your individual freedom are in fighting with one another, the health of the group is more important than your individual freedom. No Jew is an island, no man is an island, no Jew is an island. That's why we speak all the time about the minyan. So it's I don't know if I am addressing part of the question at least, but that is how I see it.
I think this week you had a piece published in an anthology about COVID. Can you tell us a little bit about what you wrote there?
So I was, I submitted a piece to this anthology with thoughts about COVID, and not so much about COVID. So actually what I did is to take a Talmudic vignette, a story that in the Talmud has only 48 words, and analyze that story. That story is about a wreckage. So it's a rabbi seeing how another rabbi is floating on a boat, and that boat breaks, and the first rabbi sees his student drowning and is in pain. And then the next scene is that he's back teaching at school, and his student comes in, and the rabbi says, "Who brought you up?" Which is, "How did you survive?" And Rabbi Akiva, that's the famous rabbi who was about to drown, said that he was able to embrace one of the logs of that were floating from the wreckage, and by nodding with each wave, he made it back to the shore. And my point using that story was that, Rabban Gamliel, who is the teacher, thinks that he's always in control. So when something happens that is beyond his control, he's in deep pain. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, is someone who is capable of embracing the brokenness that surrounds him, and to nod at the waves. So he doesn't control the waves, but he kind of is able to go with the flow and make it back. And what I was saying in that piece, very short piece, was that one of the important pieces of the whole story is the question that Rabban Gamliel asks Rabbi Akiva, "Who brought you up?" And so, who are among those around us capable of lifting us up in times of storm and uncertainties and anxieties, and how can we become also those who lift up others in such troubling times? And I think that, again, it pushes us to think about how can we become a positive influence and an inspiring presence in the life of so many, instead of fueling the storm, or just say, "I can control the storm." Maybe we cannot, but we can still do things that will help ourselves and others to make it through.
It's a very important message to remember in these times. I look forward to reading the piece. Noam, I think you have a question you'd like to ask.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to I had a small comment, but first of all, thank you, Rabbi. It was very informative, and I cannot vote in the US.
Me neither.
High five. I'm just learning about it right now. And I feel in what you said about the two sides and the different opinion. I was just, before the Lunch and Learn, I was writing just a Facebook post about Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister that was murdered by an Israeli citizen because he didn't agree with his opinion. And what I wrote is what Rabbi said, that we need to treat other opinions with kindness and patience, understanding. And the connection was incredible, especially with the sources from the Torah. And so thank you for that. And yeah, I feel like because we believe in democracy, we have different opinions. So I just encourage everyone to vote no matter where in the world, but just go vote, and no matter what, I'll respect whatever you vote. Just go vote.
Yeah, I agree. It's like vote. It's important. In Argentina, for example, it's not a question of vote or don't. It's you have to vote because it's mandatory. But here, that it is an opportunity. I think it's something that we need to embrace. Even if we don't find the perfect candidate, the perfect candidate probably doesn't exist. So it's not about that. At the same time, I want to be very clear, because something that happens every now and then is this understanding that when you speak about the perils of both ends of the spectrum, some people come back saying, but they are not the same. Okay, so it's like these people are like really, really bad, and these people are not so bad, which the truth is we should embrace, accept, and engage with opinions so long as they are not kind of defending intolerance. Every time that there is no denial of the humanity of someone on the other side. And again, so the fact that we need to create a plurality of voices that can take a look at the different problems that we are facing with dignity and integrity doesn't make room for those on the extremes. So it's like Yigal Amir, Ymach Shemo, the guy who killed Rabin, doesn't get to be counted among those I want in my tent. I'm not ready to make room for those who, trade in hate. I do hope that those people will eventually repent, but for the time being, as long as they trade in hatred, I'm not so sure. Actually, I'm very sure that I don't want them in, because they don't want in. They want just to express their views, and they are not usually very fond of any other views. That's, for example, again, that applies to the Proud Boys on one end, but it applies to those on the other side of the spectrum that will understand that Zionism is an expression of white nationalism and supremacy of blah, 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 which I don't buy. I don't think it's true, and I think that needs to be addressed, because, again, on one side, the violence is very visible. On the other side, we are talking about microaggressions, and they are united on both ends in that we tend to make them, okay, it's what's happening. They don't mean that. I have heard that on this side of the spectrum and on that side of the spectrum. Again, one side of the spectrum currently has the power, so it's way more dangerous, but it's a reminder that power could be a dangerous tool in the wrong hands. So part of what we need to be doing, and it comes back to what I said before, is that we remain a critical voice no matter who is in government, because we need to provide the checks and balances so that neither of those sitting on the extremes are going to come with Jews won't take our place on one end, and on the other side won't say Israel is a white nationalist endeavor that needs to be wiped out of the map. Okay? Yeah, that's it.
A couple of questions have come in on the chat related to what you were just talking about. I'm going to start with the second one because I think it's a follow-up to what you were just saying. So where do we draw the line? So how do we decide what is unacceptable to be in our tent?
I think that, again, when we are talking about denying, when groups are trying to marginalize people because of their ethnicity, because of their race, because of their sexual orientation. When those things are there, I don't think that there is a whole lot to talk about with them. When people are pushing to kill someone who is on the other side, or they are fueling the fires that could take us to those things, okay? If your rhetoric is inspiring people to just kidnap governors, again, those things need to be addressed. And people need to be accountable, because once again, a Jewish insight, the world was created through the way God spoke. And by the same way, since we are commanded to be, in God's likeness and image, we create or destroy worlds with the way we speak. We cannot just let people, any people, but those who are elected officials, to just say whatever they say without making them accountable for those. So again, I think that some of this has been lost, and we need to reclaim some of that. We need to shape a discourse in which we make room for difference, but we set clear boundaries of what is out of line. And it's not that hard, if you ask me. Whoever denies the humanity of someone else, there's not, pretty easy. So that's what we need to create. And again, we need to create a culture that brings back people together, which we have lost, completely lost. And I think that it's very much needed if we truly want to see the betterment of this country. Because again, policies can change. We have seen it going this way, that way, back, forward, and back. But if we don't spend our time creating a place in which, again, our heart has enough rooms to allow for different opinions without the need to stop talking to each other or killing each other, then on the long run, it doesn't matter. The policies won't hold, because the country is not going to hold. So that's what I think.
There's a tension sometimes between doing what's best for the Jewish community and what's best for the country at large. We say prayers during our services for elected officials. Can you talk a little bit about how Judaism handles this kind of dynamic?
Again, I'm not sure if there is I'm not sure that it's always, or it happens that the interests of the Jewish community are necessarily against the interests of the country. I'm not necessarily sure that that's the case. At least I cannot think about any of these. I can certainly think about how, no matter what you think is the important Jewish vision for where we should be going, either party has things that need to be addressed anyhow, as I said before. So that's what I think. In terms of, I remember 4 years ago when the results of the elections came through, and again, half of the country was happy, half of the country was in a state of shock, and maybe the numbers in the congregation were not half and half, but so there was a lot of shock. And I remember saying that we still need to be praying on behalf of the country and its government and the people serving, because again, it might be that we don't necessarily resonate with their policies, but if they are successful, it might be that the country is in a better place. If they are completely a wreckage, the country is not going to be in a better place. So again, that is what I said 4 years ago. I think that again, it's part of the challenge, if you want, is to be able to differentiate the office from whomever is dwelling in that office. Again, I know it's not that easy, but again, it's like if if the government works, that should be good for the country. It might be that it's more nuanced and complicated than that, but I think that again, it's in such a complex machine as the USA government, you still want the whole structure or most of the structure or a part of the structure to continue to function. And again, it's like you see that whether you're on the right or on the left, since this country flips every 4, 8, or 16 years, doesn't matter, you see that we endure. You may say that, depending on where you are politically, on one end you say you will have to do more cleanup because this is a mess, but actually that's what every new government on the other side of the aisle actually says. So you may agree or disagree with that claim, but most, I want to be careful here, but most of what governments have done is things that, worst case scenario could be backtracked. And also the good stuff can be backtracked too. So that shows you that we are resilient and government is bigger than whoever holds the highest office. And so we need to have a bigger picture of what's going on.
Avi, I think you had a question.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Avi.
How are you? I miss our conversations dreadfully. I miss talking to you. I have just a question that I've experienced myself running a large organization. So when you come up with issues that even the reasonable people on the each side of the divide have strong disagreement on, and I'm thinking about issues like Israel and peace in Palestine. I'm thinking of how we go about dealing with immigration in our country, that even reasonable people have strong disagreements, but you personally align with one side and believe that one side has a more of a truth to it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with reasonable people having strong disagreement when you yourself fall on one side?
Well, I try to appeal to their thoughtfulness. So if they are reasonable, they think. If they are reasonable, they are willing to try to push themselves to see what they may not be seeing right now because they are passionate about what they are saying. But again, it's like my goal, if you want, is to try. I try very hard to see what's on the other side of whatever I'm thinking, just to make sure that I don't fall into the trap that is blinding me from seeing what the other guy on the other side is seeing. But then once I get there, I try to push what I believe, trying not to alienate someone who will disagree with me. But again, in my experience, as long as we move away from the sound bites and we present a nuanced, complicated picture of what's going on, people are willing to at least listen. Not that I will change everyone's mind, but again, it's like, for example, with Israel, I remember talking in one Yom Ha'atzmaut about a novel that was written by an American Palestinian writer. So some folks would say, well, it's a weird election to speak about Yom Ha'atzmaut from the experience of some sort of a memoir of an American Palestinian author. Now, on the other end, I keep recommending people here, this book, The War of Return, that was written by Adi Schwartz and Einat Wilf, an Haaretz writer and a former politician on the Avodah party, because they are speaking about how hurtful the whole idea of the return was not only created but pushed forward by the world. So it's like, I'm on the right or I'm on the left. I don't know. I don't really care about those things. What I'm saying is that complex issues need to be addressed from thoughtful views from different parties. And then, try to push people to see that these issues are very complex and it's not gonna get solved by the sound bites. I know politics are done in sound bites right now, and at the end of the day, you need to vote for one party or the other, because in Israel you have a system with 27 different political parties, and that creates some problems. Here you have two, and what happens if neither one of them is actually representing me? You still need to vote. So it's complicated, but and I'm saying that at the end of the day, I think that people need to go and vote, but always with this understanding that what will take us out of the trap is to get the reasonable people to understand that these are complex issues with nuanced answers. That doesn't confer every answer the same right or the same weight or the same value, but reminds us that it might be that what we think is the answer may need to be tweaked a little bit, and that's a healthy thing. So I don't run away from the issues. I speak about the issues, but I try very, very hard, whether it is immigration, and again, it would be an important subject anyhow, but I actually happen to be an immigrant, so I can speak in first person about this, even if my Brooklyn accent doesn't show that I'm one. You get it. It's like, but the same, when this congregation had the conversation about same-sex marriages, which was before the Supreme Court, one of the things that I'm most proud of is that by the time we engage in the whole process and we make the decision to officiate and to offer those weddings to our members, there were people who came to me and said, you know what, I'm not there yet, but the way you presented it allows me to think about this or not feel alienated from this whole idea. And I think that there is a win in which, when you can push for a policy without making people feel like I'm the winner and I'm the loser, which again, it's very politics 2020, I think that we get closer to where we need to be. And again, I hope that for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or for immigration in this country, for racial issues in this country, for LGBTQ issues in this country, and so forth. By the way, since I have you all here, let me, where is it? Oh, really? I lost one of the books that I wanted to share with you also, because it's the type of reading that I said before, it's the confirmation bias. So I actually tend to like people who will show us how complex things are. And one wonderful book about the Israeli conflict is a book by the name Catch 67 by a very, very smart guy. Let me run and show it to you because I can. Here, Catch 67 by Micha Goodman. Okay? Outstanding book, speaking about what the right in Israel got right and what the left in Israel got right. Rightfully so, he was attacked by both people on the right and on the left, because we love to think in binary ways. People like this guy, Micha Goodman, you should Google him because he's like a super smart guy. They gave me hope. It's the people who again, confirmation bias. They gave me hope because I believe what they say. But it's the type of thing that I'm always pushing for. See what the other side got right in order to shape better your own views. of how can you be better. Okay, not to necessarily give them, you're right, I will change. Is, you know, in Hebrew, it's this idea that we need to sharpen our teeth. It's like we need to be better at what we do by understanding what the other side gets right.
It seems like in these times, most people are right or left, as you're describing. But if there are any on the call among us who are still undecided, what would your advice to them be going into a polling booth, trying to make up your mind from a Jewish perspective?
Again, it's like it's a good question. I think that people need to vote. People cannot stay outside saying neither one of the candidates actually represent me. You know, dig deeper, do your homework, try to see. And again, I think that it's not only about the policies. I think that we are also voting on character. I do believe that whoever holds the highest office, and actually all the way up and down the ticket, it's people who should inspire us. That's what I think that I'm all for inspiring leadership. And I want leaders that will bring us together. That's me. But, and again, people may claim that either side of the candidates will do that. Up to them. What I think is people that are not necessarily reflecting in either one of them, the candidates, their platforms, their whatever, they should think about this. This is not I don't believe that it's a one single vote issue type of thing. It's there are plenty of differences in policies, but again, it's like I would recommend people to kind of think about the type of culture that is built or can continue be built or can be built in a different way. Again, people will go this way or that way, up to everyone, but I think that is also part of what people should weigh when they are voting. If they don't know who to vote for, the question is what's the vision that we have in terms of the political discourse and the cultural discourse, the narrative that will come out of whatever happens on Tuesday.
Avi and I both like basketball, so I'm reminded somebody sent me a basketball analogy earlier in the week. Everyone seems to understand that when the Heat and the Lakers play each other in the NBA Finals, that you choose one team. Like you don't get to pull for a third team who's not in the finals. So at this point, we have to choose. Those were some good reflections on how to do that, I think.
Yeah, but again, remember that, and this is actually very nice of American sports. In Argentina, we do things slightly different. But when the game is over, it doesn't matter who won and who lost. They hug each other. Okay, it's like they understand that they are all on this together. And you get the Lakers against the Heat final because there is an NBA putting all of them and whatever. So the analogy is right. You will have to root for one or for the other, whatever. At the end of the day, just remember that we are all basketball players willing to, or should be willing to, hug each other because there will be a new game. And so we just need to understand that, the world won't end on Tuesday evening. I can assure you, it doesn't matter who wins. It's like, it might be that the day after, some people will be fired up and happy because of the result, and the other half will say, okay, we need to work better to make sure that the next time around, the results are different. But either way, the world is not going to end. I promise you. It's a rabbinic promise, a staycation rabbinic promise. The world is not going to end because I still have a couple of weeks of vacation. So it would be very unfair. So again, vote. Be proud of exercising your civic duty. And at the same time, again, put things in perspective. We should all try to continue to work on behalf of this blessed nation.
I agree. It's a good, excellent way to kind of wrap up and push us toward next week. So keeping in mind that we are all B'Tselem Elohim. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us. Next week after the election, which we will all still be here, just like Rabbi has just promised us, we will be having Ron Hetty from Braver Angels come to talk about a new project called With Malice Toward None.
With malice towards none,
Yeah.
correct.
And so Braver Angels, for those of you who don't know, is an organization that brings together people from the right and people from the left. They call them Reds and Blues, and try to create not just presence together, but meaningful dialogue across the aisle. So Ron will be here to talk about that project. We do have a community-wide project coming up after the election. Almost all the synagogues are participating, as well as CRC. So you'll have a chance to hear a little bit about that program from Ron and sign up if you're interested. Thank you again, Rabbi, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your staycation.
Okay, good luck. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Rabbi Kullock.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone who has not voted, please go and do so. Absolutely. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all.
She's going. Good. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Deborah,
Yes.
did you, you didn't click on anything, right? As